Hello, just putting up a video here, hopefully a fairly quick one, covering some intermediate principles of isometric training to sort of get a little more out of it. One of the major problems that I noticed, there's a couple. One of the major ones is finding some way to recalibrate once you commence an effort. You really don't have a lot of feedback for whether your tension level of exertion is dropping off. So while you may think you're going as hard as you can, maybe you're not. And a good way to do that is to recalibrate either by changing the position, the angle that you're working the line of force from, or to lean forward or backwards into the load, or if you're training upper body, you can do most of your exercises, pressing and pulling ones, and pit them against your lower body and use the strength of your lower limbs against the weaker upper to force the muscle to lengthen. One very basic principle of overcoming isometrics to get the most out of it is to train at longer muscle lengths for every exercise. I use a pretty basic formula, 8 exercises, push, pull, hinge, squat, and then one accessory for each, and I just alternate them. So to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, and demonstrate on this board, it's just a sheet of plywood with a bunch of holes cut in it so that you can run the strap through different widths. And these are just 16-foot cargo straps. They can be had at any big box store. I use 2 of these, and I'll get into the reasons why I have more than one in just a minute. So one of the principles would be changing angle. So if I'm doing a deadlift or something similar, a hinge exercise, this isn't truly a deadlift, one thing I can do is lean back, and if I don't apply more tension, I'm going to fall right over. I'm going to overbalance. It also changes the specific muscles that are being hit by the movement. So if I'm doing this as part of my routine, I often wrap a towel around these because the straps get so tight to the hands. So timer goes off, boom, maximal contraction, lean forward a little bit, and then rock back, maintaining that maximal contraction. And at the 2 ends, you're going to put an extra little exhale, exhale, and then at the end of my timed exertion, and I usually do these 10, 15, 20, 25, you can break them up however you want. I'll apply a couple of pulses, just sharp pulls for probably just under a second each. I'll do anywhere from 10 to 20 of these depending on where I am in a training cycle. And that is to maintain a little bit of extra pliability in the tendon and to work a little bit of power. And these are extremely challenging. If you get into doing these for 25 seconds at a maximum pull, you will definitely get stronger. Alright, so that is principle of changing angles, and you can do this with a lot of different exercises. I generally only resort to that for things like squats, deadlift, situations where I can't overpower the movement using some other method. Get this out of the way for now. We'll go on to squat, which is going to be done in a very similar manner. I'm going to wind up applying a lean to it. And this is going to change too, depending on whether you're using a front squat, back squat, high bar, low bar, whatever. So I tell people when you're doing this, give it a couple tries, and if it doesn't feel like it's hitting the muscle you want it to hit at a very high level of exertion, then scrap it. Now, as with the deadlift, where I was quite low, actually grabbing the strap only a few inches from the floor, that's lower than a barbell even, or any other comparable. I mean, you could raise it up. If you're just starting out, don't worry so much about getting the biggest stretch on all your muscles. But as you get into this, the literature demonstrates that the longer the muscle length that you train at, biceps for example, you get the advantage of the strength at that angle plus all shorter muscle lengths. So when people say, oh, when you do isometrics you only get 15 degrees, you get 15 degrees in the longer direction, you get the whole thing in the shorter. And that's been demonstrated with leg extensions, curls, a bunch of other exercises. So if you want to get the best dynamic range of strength from your training, train at a longer muscle length. So this would be the squat. This might not be low enough for me here. Yeah, that's, well, I'll shorten it just a little bit. I like to get these very low. I want a good stretch on the quads, glutes, everything. So same thing, I'm going to get my feet behind where the strap is, so when I lean back into it, it increases the amount of tension on the left. So the timer goes off, bang, I push. It wants to pull me forward a little bit, I lean back. This almost turns it into more of an upright or a front squat. And then I'll come forward, kind of bounce it a little bit. You can see the board's lifting up. That's where the sandbags come in. I usually just plop one right on the board, keep it from flipping. The other thing you could do, this is a 2 foot by 4 foot board. You could make yours, 3 by 4, whatever. Drill the holes on one side so when you lean back, it can't flip over. That's probably what I'll do at some point, but in the meantime I got the sandbags, so that's what I use. Alright, so that's the squat. Again, start out here, lean back, and force yourself back upright. As you go forward a little bit, maintain that tension. Whew. And the other nice thing about changing position, doing these leans and stuff like that, it encourages a rhythm. Even though you want to maintain tension throughout, when you inhale, you want to hold that tension. When you exhale, you want to increase it, just like regular lifting. Alright, so that's squat, deadlift. Pretty much set up for what would be an overhead press. I'm going to do these at a slight angle, but make sure you get the basic idea here. I highly recommend a board like this or some other means of training isometrics that do not require your body weight to brace or pitting similar muscle groups against each other. Because what happens is, as you exert, your body says, oh no, that's all I got, but really it's just putting on the brace because it doesn't want you to fall over, pull yourself out of position. A perfect example is the old grab a door frame and try to work your pecs with it. Well, in reality, your pec's going to win. It's going to push you right over if you're training regularly. Pardon my breath. Isometrics are extremely taxing at the moment. They don't pull a lot of glucose out of the muscle by themselves, but it's not easy. This is early in the morning for me too. Anyway, overhead press. If you're just starting out with this stuff, you can simply stand right in line with the straps, bend your knees, and use your legs to open this muscle up a little bit, lengthen it, your shoulder. After a while, that becomes kind of a little less involved. So the same thing, I'm going to put my feet forward to the strap. When I lean forward, I preload the muscle, which is something you want to do with every exercise, whether you can lean into it or not. Like maybe you notice with the squat, I lean back, boom. That preloads the muscle. When the timer goes off, you want to exert as rapidly as possible. And that goes counter to some isometric advice that you'll come across that advise you to ramp up to a slow level of exertion. The science is pretty good. They said ballistic intent produces the best result. So ballistic intent, exert as quickly as you can, but not from a slack muscle. That's just a recipe for pulling something. So you want to preload to about 30% of your contraction effort. And when the timer goes off, you go full. So with the overhead press, I'm going to lean forward a little bit, take up the tension. When the timer goes off, I'm going to lean a little bit more. I'm also going to push out. That has the effect of bringing my body back up. And I can force a little more weight forward to jam into them muscles. And one of the things you want to do with the muscle locked is get that little stretch. The muscle itself isn't really visibly lengthening, but when you're doing this, you can feel that the level of force on it has indeed increased, and it is indeed opening up that muscle just a little bit. You don't need a lot of eccentric stretching under load to produce a good hypertrophic effect with isometrics. You don't need to do a full range of motion. You want the muscle to be somewhat stretched, and that's to get the most out of it. And also the science says if you're doing curls, for example, if you're working your curls up here, not only do you not get the benefit of getting stronger notably outside that training range, you get a blunted effect. So you want to train at a longer muscle length for everything. So I got my shoulders. The only way I could do it longer would be to contort in some way that's not going to work. You also need to be able to exert maximally and feel like you are. So if you can't do that, you need to change your exercise. Anyway, overhead press, lean forward, boom, I can push out. And it's important to note that you don't want to just kind of flop and do like this. You can do that without a maximal contraction. You want max contraction. Drive with the legs. When your arms start to open up, you've exceeded their ability to apply tension. So just jam it back down. But it's important that you challenge them as you go. If you just stand there and drive maximally, after about 3 or 4 seconds, you're going to notice, well, in the absence of any sort of external resistance, you're going to notice that you fall off. And how you would notice that is just try to jam and then lean forward a little bit. And you can feel that increase in tension, and you are able to exert harder, lo and behold. So if just include it in your routine. If you're starting out to isometrics, just work on driving hard. You don't need to do anything extra. But after about a month or two, you're going to start rolling in some of these other concepts. Okay, next, as we'll do bench press. Some of these you need either a bench or a squat rack to do. And you'll note too, again, I've mentioned this more than once, or not a squat rack, you'll either need a bench or some kind of sandbag to work on. The amount of movement, added movement, is almost negligible to the eye. You don't really need a lot of joint movement, but just changing the angle on the targeted muscle will elicit positive training effect, adaptive response. So one of the things that I've learned to do for the most part, I mimic barbell lifts as much as possible. Not because I think that's the holy grail, but because that is the way to wedge your body in between a line of resistance where you can exert maximally. And that's kind of important. There have been studies that show submax isometrics to be pretty effective. I would argue that unless you're just starting out or you're rehabbing or something, find a way to increase it a little more than that. You want to get very close to 100%. All right, now with this one, what I'm going to do is get my shoulders up a little bit higher than the anchor point on the strap. Timer goes off, bang. I'm going to push forward. This, in effect, somewhat shortens the line compared to my shoulders, and it definitely does as I attempt to go up, or it has that sensation. Either way, I move, boom, exert. I want to hold it, exhale, hold it, exhale. Boom, boom. Wherever that I am when it stops, that's where I'm going to fire my 10 off. 10 rapid shots. You want to go about as hard as you can. That'll help maintain power, help maintain a rapid firing rate for the motor units, because I suspect that if you do just a lot of slow isometrics, you will eventually lose that. Even though they preferentially recruit fast twitch, if you aren't using a fast twitch muscle to fire rapidly, then you're only getting half of it, and it's not going to work for you in an environment where you need it if you haven't been training it. It'll get bigger and it'll get stronger, but you need to teach it to fire quickly. So I just do that, and I'm not training for any kind of major sports or anything. This is all about fitness, longevity, all that. And one of the reasons that I got into isometrics was to give my joints a nice break from all the isotonics. And it has absolutely worked, especially knees, elbows, all that stuff. They really appreciate not being forced through a range of motion if they don't need it. And I've gone back and tested repeatedly. I mean, clearly I'm maintaining a physique of sorts, and my strength has increased or stayed the same for every exercise. In fact, when I first started doing isometrics, I went back and tested, I think about the 6-week period, and some of my reps and weights had gone up 20 to 30%. You know, that didn't continue on a trajectory. But clearly, including some isometrics, even if you're like, I'm not doing that, is good for long-term training. Alright, so get back on track here. Another option for increasing that tension, recalibrating on the fly, is to change the line of force that you are working from by adding another point to it. So that sounds a little confusing. It's a little confusing to me after I just said that, but it'll become pretty obvious. So I got a big tangle of straps here, but in reality what I got is a line coming up from the front of the board to here. I'm going to be working traps, rear delts. This is similar to like a lateral. I'm going to pull here. I used to do these to the board, but the angle on the muscle wasn't so good, and I wasn't able to really hit the muscles I wanted to target as effectively as I can this way. But unfortunately, it violates a couple principles, which are don't just pit one muscle against another muscle, unless you're pitting upper body against lower. But one of the things that you can do is attach another line here. And now, just like leaning into the board or anything else, when I lean back now, it's going to want to lengthen those muscles. I'm going to shrink this just a little bit more. So basically I'm pull, exert, as I lean back, let my weight fall away, my hands come closer together. There's no way I'm going to defeat that. And if it seems like I can, I just lean forward. And if I want to exert harder than I thought I could, or start to kind of lean forward a little bit with my body, push with the heel, I can help myself pull myself back up. And that amount of movement, which is minimal, is enough to really change the adaptive response of your isometrics. You can just stand here with a loop and pull, and pull, and pull. You're going to find that the lack of recalibration during the effort means that you aren't pulling as hard as you can. And you can actually, if you get enough of a lean, you can force this guy to collapse your movement a little bit. There's no way that the muscles of the upper body can resist if you compromise their leverage enough. So that's the pulling low. If I want to pull high, I'm just going to make this strap longer. This could take a minute here. And By using, one of the nice things about isometrics is you can train any angle you want. At all. So if you notice, hey, you know, the outside edges of my shoulder aren't quite peaking, all you need to do is train so that that line of resistance lines up with whatever muscles groups you feel like training the most, and exert hard, and you're going to hit them. The overhead pull is going to be a little different. Some people might say, well, you don't need to do isometrics to hit some of this stuff, and that's absolutely true. But I feel there are real reasons to use isometric exertion beyond rehab or convenience. And it's certainly convenient. I mean, I've got the equivalent of a bench, a squat rack, and a cable machine, double cable machine, all on a piece of plywood that I can put anywhere. And the reason I do use the plywood, boards, things like that, there's a huge difference between trying to squat on a board with a strap through it and running a strap under your feet. And even with shoes on, you will definitely notice the difference. So now, once again, we have a huge tangled spaghetti ball of straps here. Pull this through. Boom. Now I'm going to do the same thing I did pulling low. Now I'm just pulling high. I'll get myself a little low. I pull, limit the amount of contribution from the triceps as much as possible. Slight lean forward forces those hands together, stretching those muscles. And you can do this. If you want to extend the triceps a little bit, open the elbow up. You will notice that your triceps engage massively on this. This is actually very similar to the tricep exercise I use, where I simply lean forward. And that little jolt, the triceps are no match for it. So in tricep, high pull, and if I want to pull in front of myself somewhat, step through this, and do the same thing from the front. So now I'm changing the angle of attack on the back muscles, the lats. When I lean forward, it stretches anyway. And trying to straighten that out when you have such little mechanical advantage is a real chore. And it definitely tests, again, are you really pulling or pushing as hard as you can? And again, a lot of the research says at 70% you're getting most of the benefit. I'm not entirely convinced of that. And one of the reasons why, if you're training at home, it's impossible to gauge if you're at 70%. You can gauge if you're at 100, which is basically everything you got. So unless you have some kind of measuring device attached to your straps, you really only have one option that you know will work, and that is to go as hard as you can. If you're just starting out using this for rehab, say, man, I just want to get into shape or whatever, then don't worry about it so much. Just go hard, get it done, use holds that do not require bracing with body weight, that sort of thing. I believe that's about it. There was one more I wanted to cover, and that is biceps, and you can use this with a couple of other exercises. I might even be able to use this with the same setup here. I won't have to rethread the straps through and through. Just shorten this one out. Alright, and one of the things you can do for bicep, hollow out your midsection so that your elbows come forward. If you're here, the tendency is to use all your shoulders and your upper back muscle. Don't do it. Hollow out, keep your elbows forward. Once you start to exert, push your arms out and away from your body. And that decreases the amount of leverage you got, increases the strain on your bicep without changing the angle, and it works really well. Otherwise, you're left with trying to pull yourself back. What happens is the angle of your body to those straps starts to get tighter, and you wind up just kind of pulling with the upper back and resisting with the skeleton. You don't want to do that. Alright, well I hope this was somewhat informative. I've been using these for almost a year now. I'm having a hard time going back to isotonics. I got sandbags, a couple kettlebells, but I just don't see the point in it. Anyway, thanks for watching.